Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. It's day 4, March 22nd. Good morning, Penny.
Good morning. It is
I,
cold here. What is it like out
oh,
there in California?
it's very, very warm in the 80s today. So sorry.
We got blowing wind and it was like 35 when I went out this morning trying to walk that little puppy early in the morning. I was like, oh,
Oh, I got to tell you, I'm still thinking about Respect the Mic, the conversation that we had yesterday.
mhm.
Um, I was thinking about how Peter mentioned in the talk yesterday about how teaching can be such a draining profession
Oh,
and that
yeah.
he himself nearly abandoned teaching, but it was the spark of poetry that
Mhm.
reinvigorated his career and completely put it on a different trajectory. And I'm thinking, we've been talking before we came on about how and we're going to share this today, how we might use some of the poems found in that collection. And it just strikes me, you've taught approaching 39 years.
Yeah. In the
I
fall.
taught 35 years.
Yep.
Tomorrow, we're going to talk with Tom Romano, who's taught 45 years.
Yeah. And has gone
And
back to teach a class this year after retiring after 45. And Linda Reef retired after 40 years
40
in
years. And
teaching.
what do all 4 of those teachers have in common is we were all the way to the end, still trying to reinvent
Mhm.
our curriculum, reinvent our approach to kids, especially in that field of poetry, which
Yeah.
has, as we know, some kids are very reluctant when they walk in the door.
It's so true. And I think for both of us, when we wrote Four Essential Studies, wasn't your favorite chapter to work on poetry?
Yeah, I think it was.
I
I think I
just,
learned the most in writing that chapter as well, having sat down and write my own poem.
yeah. And I think it's hard, listening yesterday, I was so struck by how poetry had really just for so many students transformed the way they became learners in the entire school day. And that it is always given this kind of backhand, April's National Poetry Month, we'll read a few poems approach when it can be the heart, right? What are practices that need to shift in order for that to happen? So I think we're just going to share a couple of things from our new book first, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to
So
share, go ahead.
the problem is how kids come to us, right?
Exactly. And I'm just
I
going to
was
share my screen so you can see a couple of things that we thought about.
So I was in some ninth grade classes in December, just a couple months ago, and we gave them this survey. I gave them this survey, trying to figure out, their feelings about poetry before entering a unit on poetry. And at the bottom of the survey, I asked kids, just give me a line or two of what they're thinking when they think of the word poetry. And so Angel here was very representative, right? All his responses were, I don't like poetry. I never read it. I don't do it in my free time. It's hard. I don't like it. And my favorite poets are none, right? And so we asked kids and we got responses like this. When I think about poetry, I think of it as annoying, or poetry is, in my opinion, just a small paragraph which just need made hard to read. Nothing interesting, words trying to rhyme.
I love ninth graders.
When I think about poetry, I get filled with dread. Trying to figure out the meaning behind the poem is a painstaking task alone.
Ouch.
When I hear poetry, I always think, crap, I'm going to hate it. And then
I
my,
love
my
this kid.
my favorite one is, I think poetry is boring and only the older people like it. Maybe I'll like it too in a few decades. I mean, what the hell is going on here? What have we done? And by the way, I didn't have to cherry pick these responses. There were many, many more. And so I'm struck by this attitude of kids coming in to a poetry unit. I'm struck with the juxtaposition of that with those kids yesterday, that
Oh,
poetry changed their lives. And I'm thinking, as we stated in Four Essential Studies, that we may have things backwards, right? The way we're
yeah.
approaching something so beautiful to make kids so resistant to it.
To have a kid say, I always think, crap, I'm going to hate it. I mean, that is like walking in. I remember we talked about how, the food pyramid went through this transformation. It used to look like this. Now it looks like a plate. And we imagined like the old thinking was transformed. So what's the old thinking about teaching poetry? I think it's that we bring in a poem, a great old poem, and we give it to every kid and we analyze. And the next day they come in and we give them another poem, or a day and a half later, right? And there's this, behind every poem are these deeper meanings. And then talk about perhaps how the form of the poem impacts meaning. We might talk about sonnets in particular. But if there's any time left, kids create poems. But of course, in the classes I took where this was the standard curriculum, by the time he gave me time to write a poem, I knew I could never write a poem that had 15,000 hidden meanings and that anyone would ever find that it was valuable. So I had no interest in even trying.
Which is why we got those responses.
I think so. And it's with the best of intentions. Teachers want kids to see the possibilities in poetry, I think. But we imagined for this new book that it would be smarter, at least in our work, we found it is, to have students practice creating poems, standing on the shoulders of poets, imitating, picking a line, a phrase, learning different forms, that the two central acts of the poetry unit is a volume of reading poetry or listening to it read, and writing next to poems. Those two pieces are the heart of what we talk about.
Using poems as a launch pad to explore your, things that you care about, things that you're passionate about, things that you're interested in. Not giving kids a poem and giving them 4 questions, but giving kids a poem and asking them, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think? And then now that you have your idea, what kind of a form best suits your meaning? Is it that you're writing after another poet like Clint Smith and you're going to imitate how he goes after meaning? Or are you going to create a form that is specific to what you're writing? But the form becomes a vehicle. It's part of this creation piece. Mm-hmm. And then rarely I bring in one poem and we spend lots of time looking at how exactly that one poem works.
Yeah, it's complete inverted from what's traditional.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we thought about for today is, what does that look like in class right now? Because for me, I'm actually teaching 5 English classes on Thursday in Michigan, and I'm planning the quick writes, and I'm going to absolutely make use of some of the ones from Respect the Mic. And one of the things that we mentioned yesterday that is available to everyone is their website, where you can have the students read their poems. And in my class, I always have copies of that poem in front of every kid, because I think they not only need to hear it, but they can go back to it and look at what it looks like on the page. So we're going to start with a poem that comes early in the collection called Identity Black. So early, in fact, that it is the second poem. And the minute I landed on it, I had to write next to it. So we're going to start by listening to the poet read her work. And this is Kyla Robitou. Is it Robitou? Robitou? She's going to read her poem, and then we're going to look at it together.
Black. Only moved to Oak Park because it's diverse. Black. Too light-skinned to be my father's daughter. Black. With hair too knotted to be my mom's kin. Black. In Naperville, on the entire street, it was just us, Black. And in elementary school, it was only me, Black. When my dad came to pick me up, a child screamed. Black, a color she had never seen, was a miscreation. And Black, a little me, transferred schools to see people with tinted skin. Black, where the grades were lower and they couldn't afford books because Black had no money and no knowledge. Lived in a neighborhood where Black, the N-word, made its voyage to my dad behind my back because Black shouldn't be making more money than the white kid's parents. So later me, Black, and my brother moved to Oak Park without having to suffer hate for Black. On Halloween night 1 year later, I went out with a friend, black, only to find torment from a neighbor thinking we, black, couldn't possibly live in this neighborhood. As the night pressed on, black, I slept, and couldn't not find any explanation to the hate, hard black. This poem I wrote in sophomore year. It was an assignment given to me in my English class when the spoken word teachers came to teach a unit. This particular assignment was just to write a poem where the last word of each sentence was the same throughout the entire poem. And I decided to write about something that was frustrating to me at the time, because that year I was experiencing some racism, especially within my English class. And I just needed to write about my experience a little bit and then stand up in front of them and read it to them and hopefully give them a taste of what they were making me feel at the time.
Wow.
Writing advice from me, I would say, is to just remember to take breaks and look back at things with fresh eyes. Sometimes you can write something and think it is complete garbage, and then the next day you wake up and you realize you're being a little too hard on yourself. It's good to ask others for advice because they will see mistakes you won't. And it is great to take inspiration from others because everybody takes inspiration from somebody.
Wow.
And then if you look, what they've included on this website are ways you might invite students to write next to this poem. And so part of what I love about this entire collection is that they're inviting these students to share a little of their process, which is powerful for kids to watch. But as I was reading that poem in the collection, I put down identity, and then I made a list of one-word descriptions that people use to define me. And, you know, things like daughter, grandma, mother, woman, weak, afraid, white, tall, poor. And that's how I'm going to introduce it with kids. Make a list of labels that people give you. Now, they were different in high school than they are for me now. But what are some labels that people give you? What are some of yours?
Male, white, teacher, hiker. I don't know. I'm doing this off the top of my head. I wasn't expecting this. I don't know. Sports enthusiast, father, son.
Yeah.
You could go in so many different. I love, identity, comma, black becomes identity, comma.
Right.
You pick something.
Right. And so what I'm going to show the students is I just started doing a list, and I'm following the guideline of putting the last word as the same in every one. Yep. And so one of the things that marked me is until my father stopped drinking at 12, we really struggled to have enough money in our house. So I used identity, poor. My whole life, I never forgot my identity, poor. Standing just past the checkout in the grocery store, poor. Mom couldn't pay for them, left me to guard them, poor. Ice cream melting to drip drop on the floor, poor. Watching easy money pass wallet to cashier, cart after cart, poor. Mom borrows from friends. Once uncle and grandma say no more, poor. Dad drinks, poor. Dad drives drunk, poor. Dad sleeps off work, poor. Mom and dad bet on the dog races, poor. Dad has no job, poor. Dad gets sober, still poor. It's a long climb out from poor to enough to more than poor. It's college loans, poor. It's crappy cars and bald tires, poor. It's counting quarters to pay for dinner, poor. It's wanting, poor, but waiting, poor. It's not going to live my life wanting, poor. It's pay your bills on time, poor. It's out of money on the 10th of the month, poor. Too proud to call home, poor. Then too desperate not to, poor. A bag of potatoes, 10-cent dinners, poor. Popcorn fills you up and costs so little, poor. How is popcorn the only thing you have to eat in this apartment, poor? Married me anyway, poor. Taught me how to save, poor. Led me to give to others, though still poor.
Wow.
It's not going to be anything. It's in my notebook. But man, I love the form.
I love that, just the authenticity of that. I could just hear the passion when you were reading it. And I'm going to state the obvious again. Somebody who's taught 38 years could go into the file cabinet and just pick out something you did last year. But you are re-energized, and your kids are re-energized because you are re-energized. by finding a poem that moves you and bringing it in. And then that gets to that second thing, right? Is not just have the kids write to it, but you go first and you model that passion first. It's contagious.
Well, and so Thursday, when I'm in this class using this poem, I'm going to have this, my rough draft, under the doc camera while they're doing their rough drafts, but I'm going to be revising it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I'm going to do to it. I won't look at it till then so that it's really authentic. But then I've given them the invitation to go back and revise.
Yeah. So another poem that I thought that might be really fun to bring in and have kids imitate is Leah Kindler's Why I Write Poetry. She doesn't end each line with the same word. She begins each line with the same word. It's on page 29 of the book. And so this is called Why I Write Poetry.
Why I Write Poetry, after Major Jackson. Because I could say my friend's exes live in a swamp in my heart and no one would ask what it means. Because my head is level and my wrists are narrow. Because after block parties and cookouts, my mom corralled us into the bathtub to wash dirt from our souls. Because nowadays, I go to bed with unwashed feet. Because everyone who didn't eat breakfast in my house hates grapefruit. Because instead of letting people in, I rebuild myself around them. Because it haunts me that my aunt would still be alive if she had health insurance. Because I still think about characters in books I read at age 11, now nameless and faceless. Because all my poems end up in AP style. Because I always have a crush on someone taller than me. Because I can't find anyone in New England who knows what it's like to ride the Brown Line over the Chicago River in summertime. Because my best friend and I have different words for love. Because I'm still afraid to die. Because I rode razor scooters on the blacktop with the boys before school. Because walking through Boston feels like spitting out cold air. Because I spent a Valentine's Day at a funeral I couldn't cry at. Because the winter always makes me like this. Because I don't know what I mean by like this. So I wrote this poem my freshman year of college in an introductory poetry workshop. It's inspired by a Major Jackson poem with the same title and the same structure of beginning lines with because and the list format. I think most of the revision process for me after I wrote the first draft and had it workshopped in my class was basically just rearranging the lines, figuring out the right balance between poetic lines and more concrete literal lines. I think what I love about this poem and what I ultimately think like the thesis is that you can have all of these things that feel really valuable and important to you to know about you, and you can write them in a poem and people have to read it, they have to listen, they have to accept that there is some meaning or value to those things, even if those are not facts that are traditionally assigned value in the world. Like the fact that I used to eat grapefruit for breakfast every morning in the winter growing up, no one really cares about that, but it's something that I think is really integral to who I am and the way that I am. And I think that is special about me, and so I can write in a poem and you're gonna have to listen and understand that it has value within the poem. So I think that that is also kind of my writing advice, is write things that seem important to you, even if you've been told they're not important, even if the world has said they're not important. They are important because you think they're important, and as a poet, the most important thing, I need to stop saying important so much, but the most valuable thing to know about yourself as a poet is that you can write the world however you want, however you see it. And that's something that's really, really empowering to figure out.
I like how she revised herself as she was talking, but there's so many. I mean, just to write, just pick a word, line, or phrase. There's so much in here. I mean, just listening to this poem brought 5 or 6 different writing ideas into my head. Some of the lines, and because instead of letting people in, I rebuild myself around them, because it haunts me that my aunt would still be alive if she had health insurance. There's so many lines here that would trigger kids to write. But I also like she did after Major Jackson, is to imitate the style of it and start each line with because. And so instead of I write poetry, I think one thing we do is have kids brainstorm why I lists. And we talked about this just before we came on, and I brainstormed why I love the ocean, why I take walks, why I help my 90-year-old neighbor, why I watch baseball, why I won't talk to my childhood friend, why I record these videos, why I write, why I like being alone, why I miss her.
Wow.
You know, I mean, there's so many things that, and kids could just take that and go because it's so rich.
Well, I was thinking just about all the kids I've taught. Why do I still play lacrosse? Why do I miss football? Why did I cry at graduation? I mean, there are endless and, you know, unbelievable, Kelly. As I'm watching her, I realize, because I look back knowing she's in Boston. So in 4 Essential Studies, we show the work of one of my students, Abby, and her 3 essays she had to write for freshman comp. When I read Respect the Mic, I immediately texted her and said, there's a girl at Emerson who is in this book of poetry. She knows her. They've been in the same classes.
Oh, that's
and it's like, man, what a powerhouse that is. Those two, they're
That's
such
great.
writers.
That's great.
I love both of those are great examples of making it easy to enter a poem, right? Some of the reasons that I have kids imitate a form is because it makes it easy to enter it. And all of a sudden you feel like I have just done what Clint Smith did. You know, something you should know about me is as a kid, I once worked in a pet store. That opening line allowed my kids to say, I once stole cigarettes from my grandmother. And then you just follow that he's getting you closer and closer and closer to the experience. And then he ends with this bigger lesson. And I feel like it's a blueprint. Doing this kind of work with kids is a blueprint for them finding themselves as poets in a way that isn't threatening and allows them also to kind of find themselves as writers.
And not only not threatening, but invigorating and empowering.
Right, right. To end up with a collection of things they've written in their notebook. You know, I think this practice of generating thinking day after day after day in writing, you know, it's what we both saw from Tom Newkirk. When I took, actually Tom Romano, we both saw that in his work. Tom Newkirk, when I took his class, had us write every single day. And it was often funny because Tom loves humor. So he would show us a clip from South Park and then we would write, you know, but it was the same idea that you need to get comfortable generating your own ideas, using your own life as a way to talk about something. And that, you know, it's something that I just can't imagine teaching without. Mm-hmm. So these teachers where I get to guest teach in their rooms and they get to watch me and analyze what I'm doing on Thursday, 5 different grade levels in this one high school. And I was thinking about how what I want to model more than anything is the ease at which kids can enter writing when you set it up in ways that are accessible.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, I'm always nervous when I guest teach. Have these kids had practice with notebooks? How much do I need to preview them? You know? Right, so we'll see how it goes.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's all from here, right?
Are we going to wrap it up today?
Well, it feels like it's been about 20 minutes or so. Anything else happening with you?
That sounds good. And we already tipped our hand a little bit. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, we are super excited because one of our favorite educators in the whole wide world, Tom Romano, someone who's influenced us for not only years, but for decades, has agreed to come on and share some thinking about the teaching of writing tomorrow. So that's going to be fantastic. Can't wait.
You know, here's a trivia thing about Tom Romano. I was out and I got him a gift one time, Shut Up and Write, a t-shirt. I didn't know that shut up is offensive to him, that he didn't allow his kids to say the phrase shut up when they were little. And so I send him this present and he's like, kiddo, you didn't even know that this isn't a, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, Tom, just, you know, give it away, do something with it. He tells me all the time now how often he puts that shirt on, goes to his, because he writes at a coffee shop and brings out his notebook. And he said how many times it started conversation, but I've always felt guilty.
That's great. Can't wait for that conversation tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. Go back and get your writing. Bye.
Bye-bye.